in Christian societies to the point where nobody even thinks about its prohibition anymore. Jesus Christ did not take or give usury. Interest was forbidden. And everybody knows the story of Jesus Christ having overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple. Whether this was related to usury or not, we cannot say. But what we can say is that usury was one of the greatest sins of the time of Jesus Christ. And yet we now find Christian societies based upon usury. We find everybody so dependent upon taking and giving interest in their monetary dealings that they practically cannot live without it. Whereas on the other hand, we find Muslim societies functioning on the level of Islamic banking, and we find interest is not an element of Muslim financial dealings. Let's take another example. Extramarital contact with women. Jesus Christ was a man of modesty. He did not have any recorded extramarital contact with women. Possibly there may have been contact, we may speculate, in the process of delivering sacraments or healing. However, there is no clear documentation of any extramarital contact. How do we compare that with what we see in modern-day societies, where in Christian countries, extramarital contact between the sexes has become the norm rather than the exception? Again, in Islamic societies, you do not find this to be the case. You find Muslims living in a manner that is more compatible with the example of Jesus Christ. With each section that I'm discussing here, I'm getting deeper into the more important points. We started with appearance, then manners. We started talking about religious practices. Now let's talk about practices of worship, an even more important issue. It is recorded that Jesus Christ was an Orthodox Jew. In accordance with the practices of his time, he made ablution as part of worship. Read in Exodus 40, 31 through 32, where Moses and Aaron made ablution. This was the practice of the righteous of the time. A practice, again, that has not been maintained, but is to be found among the Muslims, in the Islamic community. Jesus Christ prayed in prostration. Read the whole Bible. Read the whole Bible and look for any passage that describes the manner of prayer, the manner in which Jesus Christ prayed. The only description you will find is when Jesus Christ went into the Garden of Gethsemane and fell on his face in prayer. Prostration. Prostration described for Jesus Christ in the same way that it was described in the Old Testament for the Old Testament patriarchs and prophets. Jesus Christ fasted for more than a month at a time, again, following the example of the righteous before him. And he made pilgrimage for the purpose of worship. Pilgrimage in his time having been to Jerusalem. Now, we have just gone down a list of some of the greatest integrals of worship. Ibadah in Arabic, worship in English, ablution before prayer, purifying yourself before praying, fasting, and pilgrimage. Again, where do we find these examples better maintained among the followers, among the Christian community, or among the Muslims who make ablution before prayer, who pray in prostration, who fast the month of Ramadan, 1 month every year, and who make pilgrimage to Mecca as an article of worship? Now, everything that I have mentioned is important, but what I'm going to mention now is most important, and that is the matters of creed. Jesus Christ taught Tawhid. Tawhid being the oneness of God. 3 times in the New Testament, he was asked about the greatest commandment, and he replied, "Know, O Israel, thy God is one." We find that in Matthew, we find it again in Mark, we find it again in Luke. This is a teaching taken directly from the first commandment. And yet, once again, where do we find the oneness of God best maintained in religious creed? Among Trinitarian Christians or among Muslims who adhere to a belief in God as one God without compromise, without partners, without division? Similarly, Jesus Christ declared himself in multiple passages to be a man and a prophet. 88 times he called himself the Son of Man. Nowhere did he call himself the Son of God in a literal, begotten, not made sense. And if you doubt that claim, you have only to read my books for the evidence, for the scriptural passages, and for the refutations. Or stay tuned, because we expect to cover this in another episode. However, the fact of the matter is, if you are reading the scriptures from the Greek, not from the translation, and this is very important, but from the Greek, you will find that Jesus Christ called himself the Son of Man 88 times, never called himself the Son of God in a literal, begotten, not made sense. Similarly, he called himself a prophet and never deified himself. Once again, where do we find the religion that respects Jesus Christ as what he claimed to be, a man and a prophet of God, if not in the religion of Islam? What I have presented here are a number